For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople stood at the meeting point of Europe and Asia. Armies came to its walls, fleets crossed the waters around it, and empires rose and disappeared beyond its horizon. Yet the city endured. By the spring of 1453, that long survival was close to ending. Constantinople was still the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the state we usually call the Byzantine Empire. Its people still thought of themselves as Romans, but their empire had been reduced to the capital and a few scattered territories. Outside the walls, a young Ottoman sultan named Mehmed II was preparing a massive siege. He wanted the city for strategic, political, and symbolic reasons. The defenders knew major help might never arrive. What followed was a 53-day struggle of walls against artillery, ships against chains, and a shrinking empire against a rising one. On May 29, 1453, the history of the Roman world changed forever. To understand why the siege mattered, we have to see what Constantinople had become. The Byzantine Empire had once controlled much of the eastern Mediterranean, but centuries of war, civil conflict, economic pressure, and territorial loss had weakened it. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 had been especially damaging. Crusaders captured and looted Constantinople. Byzantine rulers recovered the city in 1261, but the empire never regained its former strength. By the 15th century, Ottoman territory surrounded Constantinople on both its European and Asian sides. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos ruled a state small in land but enormous in historical importance. He carried the title Emperor of the Romans, inherited from a political tradition reaching back to ancient Rome. The capital still contained churches, palaces, walls, libraries, and markets. But many neighborhoods were thinly populated, and the government had limited money, soldiers, and ships. The city looked ancient because it was ancient, and its defenses carried the memory of centuries. Across the frontier stood Mehmed II. He became Ottoman Sultan for the second time in 1451 and was only 21 when the final siege began. Constantinople divided Ottoman lands in Europe from those in Anatolia and stood beside the Bosporus, one of the region's most important waterways. Capturing it would strengthen Ottoman communications and remove a fortified rival from the center of the expanding empire. Mehmed prepared carefully. In 1452, he ordered the construction of the fortress now known as Ramilai Hizari on the European shore of the Bosporus, opposite an older Ottoman fortress in Asia. Together, these positions helped control movement through the strait. Mehmed also gathered troops, ships, engineers, supplies, and heavy artillery. Later stories often reduced the conquest to one giant cannon, but the reality was larger. Roads had to carry guns, camps had to feed thousands, and a fleet had to isolate the city. The coming attack was designed to work on land and sea at the same time. Constantinople was valuable because of geography as much as history. The city occupied a triangular peninsula. To the south lay the Sea of Marmara. To the north was the Golden Horn, a long natural harbor. To the east, the waters opened toward the Bosporus and the Black Sea. For centuries, this location supported trade, diplomacy, and defense. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, and many other places operated in and around the city. Across the Golden Horn stood the Genoese colony of Galata, officially neutral during the siege, although individuals became involved on both sides. For Mehmed, leaving Constantinople outside Ottoman control meant leaving a fortified political center in the middle of his domains. For Constantine XI, surrendering the city meant giving up the heart of an imperial tradition. That made compromise extremely difficult. By early 1453, both rulers understood that the confrontation would decide far more than possession of one city. It would reshape control of the Bosporus and the balance of power around it. Constantinople's greatest defense was its land fortification, especially the Theodosian Walls. Built and rebuilt over centuries, the system protected the western approach. An attacker faced a broad moat, an outer wall, towers, and a much larger inner wall behind them. These defenses were not simply one line of stone. They formed layers designed to slow attackers and expose them to fire from above. The walls had survived many earlier sieges, and their reputation was deserved. In 1453, however, the defenders faced artillery on a new scale. Ottoman bombards could strike masonry again and again. Even so, cannon fire did not make the walls instantly useless. Large guns were slow to load, difficult to aim, and demanding to operate. The defenders worked at night to repair damage with stone, earth, timber, and anything available. In some places, packed earth absorbed impacts better than bare masonry. The siege became a contest between destruction by day and repair by night. The old walls remained dangerous obstacles until the final hours. Constantine XI knew he could not match Ottoman manpower. His best chance was to make the walls, harbor, and small defending force work together. Greeks fought beside Genoese, Venetians, and other foreign volunteers. One important commander was the Genoese soldier Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, who took responsibility for a critical section of the land walls. Constantine concentrated men where danger was greatest instead of trying to fill every meter equally. In the Golden Horn, Byzantine and Allied ships remained protected behind a massive defensive chain stretched across the harbor entrance. Its purpose was simple: keep the Ottoman fleet out. Inside the city, the population prepared for a siege that could last weeks. Food, ammunition, repairs, religious ceremonies, and guard duty became part of daily survival. Constantine also hoped for outside assistance. Venice, Genoa, the papacy, and other powers knew the city was in danger, but politics, distance, and time worked against a major rescue force reaching Constantinople before Mehmed was ready to attack. Mehmed's army reached Constantinople with the tools of a late medieval siege on a huge scale. Ottoman infantry included regular troops, elite janissaries, and other contingents. Engineers prepared trenches, roads, artillery positions, and supply routes. The most famous weapons were enormous bronze bombards associated in the sources with a gun founder often called Orban or Urban. Some fired stone balls of extraordinary size. Yet the giant cannon was only part of a broader artillery train. Smaller guns could fire more often, while large pieces delivered heavy blows at selected points. Moving and maintaining them was difficult. Heat, recoil, slow loading, and limited accuracy mattered almost as much as power. Mehmed also had a fleet around the city. Its job was to block aid and force the defenders to divide their attention between land and sea. This combination of artillery, manpower, engineering, and naval pressure made the Ottoman plan dangerous. The siege was not a duel between one cannon and one wall. It was a coordinated campaign designed to exhaust the entire defense. The Ottoman siege began in early April 1453. Mehmed established his headquarters outside the land walls, and his forces spread along the western side of Constantinople. The defenders watched a huge camp grow beyond the moat. Tents, guns, horses, supplies, laborers, and soldiers transformed the landscape. Ottoman artillery soon began firing at the walls. Mehmed also demanded surrender, offering terms that would avoid an assault. Constantine refused. For the emperor and many defenders, the city was not something they believed they could abandon. The first days tested both sides. Ottoman troops probed the defenses and searched for weak points. The defenders learned where the artillery would concentrate. At night, teams rushed to close damaged sections before daylight brought more fire. The siege settled into a punishing rhythm. Cannons battered stone. Archers and gunners exchanged fire. Patrols watched the moat. Behind the lines, thousands waited to see whether ancient defenses could survive the newest weapons of siege warfare. The artillery bombardment became one of the defining features of the siege. Ottoman guns focused on sections of the land walls where batteries could operate effectively. Repeated hits broke stone, damaged towers, and created piles of rubble. But the famous defenses did not simply collapse after a few shots. The defenders repaired gaps, reinforced weak areas, and used earthworks to create new obstacles. Rubble could even complicate an assault by forming unstable slopes attackers had to climb under fire. Ottoman commanders therefore combined bombardment with infantry attacks, engineering work, and constant pressure. Large guns also needed time between shots. Crews had to reload, maintain equipment, and protect valuable artillery. For the defenders, every pause offered a chance to rebuild. For the attackers, every successful night of repair meant more work the next day. The struggle showed both the growing importance of gunpowder and the continuing value of disciplined fortification. The walls were being damaged, but they were still functioning as a defensive system. The land walls were only one part of Constantinople's defense. The Golden Horn protected the northern side of the city and provided a secure harbor. Across its entrance, the defenders maintained a heavy chain supported at the surface to block hostile ships. Ottoman vessels could approach, but the barrier prevented them from simply sailing inside. Behind it, Byzantine, Venetian, Genoese, and other allied ships had room to operate. This created a serious problem for Mehmed. As long as the Golden Horn remained closed, one side of Constantinople was relatively secure, and the defenders could keep more men on the western walls. The harbor also offered a possible route for outside supplies. The Ottoman fleet tried to control the surrounding waters, but ships, wind, experienced crews, and the chain all mattered. Mehmed needed a way to threaten the Golden Horn without first breaking through the barrier at its mouth. His solution became one of the most famous maneuvers of the siege, and it forced the defenders to rethink the geography of their own defenses. On April 20th, the struggle at sea produced a dramatic moment. A small group of Christian supply ships approached Constantinople while Ottoman vessels moved to stop them. The larger sailing ships had high sides and experienced crews, and the fight became a difficult contest of arrows, boarding attempts, wind, and maneuver. From the shoreline, people in both camps could watch. The supply ships eventually succeeded in reaching the Golden Horn and passing behind the defensive chain. For the defenders, the arrival was a badly needed success. It proved the Ottoman blockade was not perfect and raised morale inside the city. For Mehmed, the failure was deeply frustrating because a much larger naval force had not stopped the convoy. The event exposed a broader problem. Even if the Ottoman army dominated the land outside the walls, Constantinople still possessed a protected naval space. Mehmed responded with a plan that did not depend on forcing the harbor entrance. Instead of breaking the chain, he would find a way around it. Around April 22nd, the defenders saw something extraordinary in the Golden Horn. Ottoman ships appeared inside waters the Great Chain was supposed to protect. Mehmed had ordered vessels moved overland behind the Genoese settlement of Galata and launched into the harbor from the northern shore. Sources disagree on the exact number, so it is safer to say that dozens of vessels were transferred. The operation required planning, prepared surfaces, manpower, and coordination. It was also a psychological success. The chain was still in place, but it no longer guaranteed safety. The defenders now had to guard the walls along the Golden Horn and watch an Ottoman fleet inside the harbor. That meant fewer men could remain at the main land defenses. An attempt to attack and burn the Ottoman ships failed. Mehmed had not solved every naval problem, but he had changed the geometry of the siege. Constantinople was now threatened from more directions, and its already limited defenders had to stretch themselves even thinner. As April turned into May, the siege became a contest of endurance. Ottoman artillery continued to batter the land walls. Troops launched attacks, tested damaged sections, and forced the defenders to remain alert. In the Golden Horn, Ottoman ships threatened areas that had once seemed safer. Mehmed's engineers also tried mining operations intended to undermine the defenses. The Byzantines and their allies responded with countermeasures, detecting and disrupting tunnels when they could. No single method immediately opened the city. That showed the strength of Constantinople's defenses, but it also revealed the defenders' problem. Every successful response consumed people, tools, sleep, and supplies. The Ottomans could rotate forces and continue the pressure. The defenders had far fewer reserves. A damaged wall might be repaired, but the men repairing it became more exhausted. A night watch could stop a surprise attack, but another night would follow. By this stage, the siege was not only about breaking stone. It was about breaking the defenders' ability to respond everywhere at once. The nights of the siege were often as important as the days. When Ottoman guns slowed or stopped firing, repair crews moved toward damaged sections. They filled gaps with earth, timber, stones, barrels, and other materials. Soldiers strengthened temporary barricades and prepared new firing positions. Guards still had to watch for raids, ladders, mining activity, and sudden assaults. Ottoman engineers attempted to dig tunnels beneath parts of the defenses, hoping to collapse walls or create hidden openings. Defenders used countermining and other methods to stop them. Several attempts failed, but each one demanded attention. The city could not afford to ignore any threat. The strain accumulated. Food supplies tightened. Men were wounded or sick. The same commanders repeatedly returned to dangerous positions. Religious processions and prayers became part of the city's emotional life as people searched for hope. Outside, Mehmed had his own concern: time. A long siege increased the chance of foreign intervention. Both sides understood that the confrontation needed a decisive result. By late May, Mehmed faced a choice. He could continue a costly siege and risk new complications, or order a major assault. The walls had been heavily damaged in several places, and the defenders were exhausted, but Constantinople had not surrendered. Ottoman commanders prepared for a final attack. Equipment moved forward, approaches were cleared where possible, and troops were organized for repeated waves. Inside the city, Constantine XI and his commanders understood what was coming. They reinforced the most threatened sections and tried to keep every available defender at his post. The emperor moved through the defenses, encouraging soldiers and checking preparations. Accounts of these final days contain later traditions and dramatic stories, so historians must separate firm evidence from legend. What is clear is that the defenders expected a general assault and had little reserve strength left. The battle would likely be decided at the land walls, especially where bombardment had created vulnerable approaches. For a city that had survived so many sieges, the final test was only hours away. On the evening of May 28th, both camps prepared for what many expected to be the decisive battle. Ottoman soldiers readied weapons, ladders, standards, and assault units. Mehmed planned repeated attacks to wear down the defenders before committing his strongest troops. Inside Constantinople, people gathered for prayer while soldiers returned to the walls. Later accounts describe a final religious service in Hagia Sophia attended by people who had been divided by politics and church disputes. The details differ between sources, but the atmosphere is clear. The city had reached the end of its choices. Constantine XI did not leave. He remained with the defense. Through the night, men stood at damaged walls and gates while Ottoman activity continued outside. The artillery scars, exhausted defenders, and campfires beyond the walls made the danger visible. Before dawn on May 29th, the final assault began. After nearly 8 weeks of siege, the struggle for Constantinople entered its last hours. The Ottoman attack came in waves. Early assaults forced the defenders to fight continuously and spend strength they could not replace. Fighting concentrated around damaged sections of the land walls, where rubble and temporary repairs had changed the old defensive lines. The defenders still resisted, and the outcome was not immediate. Then Giovanni Giustiniani, one of the most important commanders on the wall, was badly wounded and withdrew from the fighting. His departure hurt morale at a critical moment. Ottoman forces pressed harder, and elite janissaries joined the attack. Somewhere in the confusion, Ottoman soldiers gained positions inside the defenses. Once enough attackers crossed the walls and gates, the organized defense began to collapse. Later stories offered different explanations for exactly how the breakthrough happened, and some details remain uncertain. What matters is that the defenders could no longer seal the breaches or form a stable line. After centuries of failed attacks by other armies, Constantinople's land defenses had finally been overcome. The city was now open. Constantine XI disappeared in the final fighting. No completely reliable eyewitness description tells us exactly how the last Byzantine emperor died. Later accounts created different versions, some heroic and some legendary. The safest historical statement is that Constantine remained in the city and died during the Ottoman assault on May 29th. His body was never identified with certainty in a way that ended later debate. That uncertainty helped turn him into a symbol. For the Byzantine political tradition, his death marked more than the loss of one ruler. There was no successor who could continue the empire from Constantinople. The Eastern Roman state had survived invasions, religious disputes, civil wars, territorial losses, and even the earlier capture of its capital. Now it ended as an independent empire. The word Byzantine is useful to modern historians, but Constantine and his subjects understood their state as Roman. In that sense, 1453 closed a political history that had developed from the Roman Empire for more than 1,000 years in the eastern Mediterranean. Mehmed II entered the conquered city and began turning Constantinople into an Ottoman imperial capital. The conquest brought violence, captivity, and disruption, as medieval conquests often did, but Mehmed's long-term goal required a functioning city, not an empty ruin. He ordered rebuilding and repopulation and encouraged people from different regions and communities to settle there. Hagia Sophia, the great 6th century church built under Emperor Justinian, was converted into a mosque and became one of the major monuments of the Ottoman capital. Other Byzantine buildings continued with new uses, while Ottoman mosques, markets, palaces, schools, and public works reshaped the urban landscape. Constantinople did not disappear when the Byzantine Empire ended. It entered another imperial era. Under Ottoman rule, the city again became a major center of government, trade, religion, and culture. Mehmed earned the title Fatih, the Conqueror. The city he captured at 21 became central to the empire he continued to build for the rest of his reign. The fall of Constantinople became one of the most famous dates in world history, but its meaning is often simplified. It did not instantly end medieval life, create the Renaissance, or suddenly close all trade between Europe and Asia. Historical change rarely works through one event alone. The conquest did end the Byzantine Empire, strengthen Ottoman control around the Bosporus, and make Constantinople the center of a growing Ottoman imperial system. European states had to adjust to a stronger Ottoman presence in southeastern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. Greek scholars, manuscripts, merchants, diplomats, and refugees continued moving across cultural boundaries, adding to exchanges already underway before 1453. The siege also showed how artillery could transform warfare without making old fortifications meaningless overnight. Most of all, the story joins two long histories. It is the final chapter of the medieval Eastern Roman Empire and an early chapter in Constantinople's rise as an Ottoman capital. Parts of the walls still stand in modern Istanbul, reminders that one city can carry the histories of several worlds at once.